What is up, guys? Jay from A&J Sports here. Welcome to today's video. With the Premier League just a little over a week away from kicking off the 24-25 season, we are going to be in store for yet another exciting season in the Premier League, full of goals, full of controversies, full of special moments. Get to see new teams coming up from the Championship, new players being brought in and representing their new clubs. We are going to have a good one this season, ladies and gentlemen. I can just feel it. But now I'm going to be doing my prediction on the 24-25 table of the Premier League and making my predictions on which teams are going to finish in what spots. We are going to be kicking off for the relegation places. And for me, personally, the teams that I think are going to be in serious contention for relegation is going to be all three newly promoted Championship sides in Ipswich, Southampton and Leicester. And the teams in the Premier League that are going to be in serious contention for relegation, in my opinion, I think is going to be between Brentford and Nottingham Forest. Those are the five teams that I am really optimistic that are going to finish in relegation for this upcoming season. So we're going to start off in 20th place, and I think that Southampton are going to finish dead last in the Premier League. Just looking the weaker side, yet again, from all the three promoted teams in the Championship. They made promotion to the Premier League through the playoffs, but their performance as a whole in the Championship last season, they, have lost many games. They lost the same number of games as Leicester, 11 matches. But the big thing for me is the amount of goals that they conceded last season. 63 in the Championship, which does not show good signs for their defence. And I just think the type of football they play can be easily broken down by most teams in the Premier League. And I am quite concerned for Southampton because I think that they are going to be in store for a real awful season. I can just see them conceding many more goals. They got a bit of investment for this upcoming season, but I don't think enough to make them real, contenders to remain in the Premier League. And with all that in mind, I think that they are going to finish dead last, in my opinion. Which should then lead me on to who is going to finish 19th. And this may seem like a shock for everyone, but I'm putting Brentford in at 19th. Everyone was expecting Ivan Toney to come back and do some real good things and come back to his old self after that long layoff. But although as good as a player he is, I don't think he's going to find his form that he did a couple seasons ago. And as a whole, offensively going forward last season, I just really did think Brentford were not that good. They don't offer much anymore up front. And I genuinely do think Ivan Toney will probably leave. And if he goes, then they've got no light at the end of the tunnel for any hope that they can go on and finish any chances or be anything creatively going forward. I genuinely just don't see how Brentford can stay in the Premier League this coming season. Just very disappointing last season. They finished at the lower half of the table last season, and I just think it's going to get worse gradually. They might be able to pick up some results. I don't think they're going to do as bad as Southampton, but in terms of, getting results against any teams that I think are going to be in the top half, I can't really see them getting many results. A few draws, maybe. And I reckon they could pick up a few wins against the bottom half. But I just can't really see a lot that Brentford have that is going to keep them in the Premier League, if I'm being completely honest. I think their time is up. And with them just losing these big name players that they've had for the last couple of seasons, it's just increasing their decline. And I think that their time is now to drop back down into the Championship. So Brentford, for me, is going to be finishing 19th. And the final spot for relegation, which would be 18th place, this was a bit tricky, this one, because as I mentioned, other teams that are in contention for that, I would put Ipswich, Leicester and Nottingham Forest also in the relegation. And the last one was pretty tough for me to pick. But I think the team that is going to go down this season back to the Championship, it is Leicester. Leicester, on the first half of their season in the Championship, they were doing very well. And there was even a point they were quite ahead in the Championship. But then they started nearly bottling the Championship, almost. And they ended up finishing the season just 1 point ahead of Ipswich. And, you know, they lost quite a number of games in the Championship last season, losing 11 games. They didn't concede nearly as much as Southampton, so that's why I don't think they're going to be even in like the same sort of form as Southampton. I do think they're going to pick up a few results, and I think the fans are going to be very excited for Leicester to get back into the Premier League. And I think when they play at home, you know, the atmosphere that the Leicester fans are going to bring will probably spur them on and get a few results. And, you know, they still got some experienced players that were in the Premier League, the likes of Jamie Vardy and so forth. But also another thing that does it for me, Enzo Manzarilla, who's left Leicester to go to Chelsea. And now they got in the replacement manager, Steve Cooper, who's had experience in the Premier League. But his last few months with Nottingham Forest, he really just lost the faith of the players in the dressing room. And I don't think he's the greatest technical manager that Leicester could have got out there. Maybe they could have got a bigger name or more inspiring young coach who has got bright ideas, and they could have used it to their advantage to keep him in the Premier League. But I just think with a bit of an old squad, a bit of, you know, I don't want to say weak leader at the helm in Steve Cooper, but, you know, not the greatest of managers leading them. I just genuinely think it's going to be much too much to ask for Leicester to remain in the Premier League. And I don't think that they're going to be in a situation where, you know, we're going to determine their fate halfway through the season. Like, they're dead bottom. They've hardly picked up any results. I think they will be in a fight with the likes of Ipswich and Nottingham Forest to remain in the Premier League. And I think they probably have their fate sealed towards the second to last, third to last game of the season. But Leicester, I think, is much too much for them to remain in the Premier League. So that's why I've determined that the teams that are going to be dropping down to the Championship after this season, it's going to be Southampton, Brentford and then Leicester City, in that order. Which then means that the teams that are going to remain safe, in my opinion, and just going to miss that relegation spot, I think is going to be Ipswich and Nottingham Forest. And I think they're going to be thereabouts in the relegation spot for probably large portions of the season. I can't see them getting any further up the table in terms of being in mid-table for some points. Maybe very early on in the first 5 games, if you know, they're fortunate in some of their matches. But Ipswich, while I think that they're going to remain in the Premier League ahead of their other fellow up-and-coming promoted sides, I think is the fact that they were more consistent throughout the Championship, in my opinion. You know, they lost very few games, they scored plenty of goals, and they were on Leicester's tail for pretty much the whole season. Even though there was a point Leicester were well ahead, they did not give in. They kept going and going, and Leeds were close with them as well. And it was a great shame that Leeds didn't come up either. But I just think they're a bit more well organised. When I see them play, looking back at their performances last season in the Championship, they did look like a well-run team. And they got some decent players in there, the likes of Hutchinson, who's a graduate from the Chelsea Academy, and a pretty decent season last year for Ipswich. If they can keep hold of players like that, then they could, you know, pick up some decent results and have some memorable moments for this upcoming season. But I do think they will just miss out. they would just miss out of relegation in the Premier League. Just due to the fact that I don't think the teams I've put in there are going to be doing that good. Like, they are going to be at the bottom for some time, particularly teams like Southampton. And I think Ipswich are going to have a season to remember, you know, and I think what's going to do it is their home ground, you know, not being in the top flight division for some time. And the fans are just going to be really excited to be in the Premier League after a long period not in it. And when you go to Ipswich ground, kind of similar to Luton this season, where they managed to pick up some results because of the atmosphere the fans made, I think that's just going to give them the edge. And they'll probably pick up a couple of shock results. Who knows? Because anything can happen in football. But that's where I stand on Ipswich. And Nottingham Forest, you know, they still got some quality in their team all across the board. They've got some very experienced players that played for some top-level clubs. They've got players like Gibbs White, who's a real talented individual. And if they can keep hold of him and other players of that calibre that they have in their squad, then they are going to remain in the Premier League without question, because there's still a while to go in the transfer market. And if I did this at the end of the transfer market, maybe my opinion could change on that. If they were to lose the likes of Hudson-Odoi, Gibbs White, etc., then I would probably rethink my position and put them in the relegation. But as of right now, if things remain as they are, I see Nottingham Forest remaining in the Premier League just along with the likes of Ipswich. So Ipswich 17th, Nottingham Forest 16th. And then moving up into lower mid-table, starting off at 15th, I have gone for Everton. I'm keeping them in the same spot that they finished last season. Made some investments into their team, but none of which I think is going to make them that much, well, probably improve them a little bit. But I think the loss of Meadow Onana is going to leave a bit of a void in that midfield. And I think it's just going to be more of the same, really, from Everton. I don't think they're going to be in serious contention for relegation. I think there might be a point in the season where they will be hovering around that area. But I think a lot of the time, they're going to be hanging about around the 15th to 12th spot and eventually just start picking up a few defeats. And I think they'll drop off a little bit, but not as much for the fans to be worried about under the guidance of Sean Dyche, who's been around for a long period of time, a very experienced coach and knows what he's doing. It won't be a case where Everton will be in contention for relegation. It's just going to be more the same, really. And then above them, I'm going with Wolves in 14th. Under Gary O'Neill, you know, he's done a pretty decent job. And they got some very talented players in their squad. You know, I think they've definitely got some magic and some firepower to win a few games. And like Everton, I don't think it's going to be a case where they're going to be in contention for relegation or even close. More of a case that they're going to be hovering around that area. But yeah, I think they're going to have some good games and they're not going to be worried at all throughout the season. I'd have Wolves at 14th. And at 13th, the final part of the lower mid-table, I'm going with Bournemouth. And this is just more for the fact that I'm predicting that I think Solanke will probably leave. I think he will leave. And if he does go, they're going to see a bit of a decline. And, you know, had a good season last year. You know, they really showed off some good clinical finishing, some good attacking football, and they picked up a few decent results and even made a tough go against some of the top teams in the league. And we might see that from time to time during the season. But overall, I don't think that this team is going to amount to anything more than just being a mid-table, low mid-table side, and that's what I think is going to be the case this season. The only way they're going to progress is if they can keep hold of their talent, and I don't think Bournemouth is a big enough or rich enough club in order to do that. And after the season Solanke had, there have been big offers, and I think eventually before the window closes, he will probably accept one of them. So that's what one of my main reasons why I've got Bournemouth in a 13th. And that is my low mid-table. Everton 15th, Wolves 14th, and then Bournemouth 13th. Now we're going to be moving bang in the middle of the table, mid-table of the Premier League, and to kick it off in at 12th place, I'm going for Brighton. Brighton, in the last couple of seasons, are starting to show a decline. You know, under the guidance of Graham Potter, they were doing very well. And then after him leaving to go to Chelsea and De Zerbi taking over, they were still doing magnificently. But bigger teams still try and pinch off their talent. And I just think now that they have got this new coach and, you know, on his resume, you know, the former Germany international under-20s, under-18s coach in Fabian Herzler, a bit inexperienced in terms of he's not had a lot of main head coaching responsibilities. He's been an assistant and a caretaker coach, and I just think maybe his inexperience and his lack of experience in top flight football, he is going to be the guy to steady the Brighton ship and get them back into where they wanted to be, which was competing for the European places. And I just think their time is starting to drop off a little bit. Like we've been seeing this bit of the decline from last season, and I think it's going to continue, and they're going to drop just a couple more places in the league. And it's just going to be more of a case, you know, they've got an inexperienced coach in like top flight football, and I think that inexperience will show in the Premier League, and we're going to see a bit more of a dip from Brighton. So I have Brighton in at 12th. And in at 11th place, I've gone for Crystal Palace. Just one place lower than where they finished last season in the Premier League. Towards the end of the season, showing some really exciting football, some quality football. But I think it's just going to be more of the same in terms of they probably won't have the greatest start, and they do have a lot of injury issues. But I do think with their academy and the talent they got coming through there, they have one of the best academies in the country at Crystal Palace. They're producing talent all over the place. They have brought up some very top English talent. And with the departure of Elise and soon to be, I think, the departure of Guéhi, I reckon he'll probably go to Newcastle. They have got a few positions that need to be filled, and I can't see him getting any solid replacements that's going to do exactly or even better what them two players offer. And, you know, there's still the possibility that Eze could move on, and maybe Mateta, if some big team comes sniffing about, they're in need of a striker. But as it stands right now, with the team that they have and the squad that they got, I think we'll probably see more of the same of what they did last season. And then in at number 10th, bang in the middle of the table, I have gone for Fulham. Fulham losing a big part in Palhinha, which is going to show in the middle of the park. That extra bit of security, a top CDM, the Portuguese midfielder who's left for Bayern Munich, and I don't think anyone can blame him trading in Craven Cottage for the Allianz Arena. But bringing in some decent talent in Emil Smith-Rowe from Arsenal, and then, you know, bringing back Ryan Sessegnon, and how he will do is a bit 50-50, I think. I mean, his promise was bright a few seasons ago, but kind of went quiet since going to Spurs. But still managed to keep hold of a lot of the top players that they got around in their squad. And I think that they will make that place at 10th. I think they'll still have a decent season, but I think Palhinha is going to be a bit of a big miss at the beginning. But I reckon they'll find their feet later on in the season and start picking up results. That's what I have for Fulham. And then in at 9th, and I know a lot of people are not going to be happy with this, but I've got Chelsea. Chelsea is one of the worst run clubs in the country right now. One of the worst run clubs in the country. Sacking off Pochettino after he managed to get European football for Chelsea, which I didn't even think that he would do last season. Started to pick up results towards the end and really started to find his feet. And then for some reason, gets sacked. And I think that is just a stupid decision. Signing Enzo Maresca from Leicester as the new head coach. But he's starting to do this is sort of a similar situation that I saw under Arteta in the start of his Arsenal career. He wants to start building up from the back, but what I've seen from pre-season, they can't build up from the back. And I just think it's going to be a worse season for Chelsea in terms of league position. They finished 6th last year in Europa League, but then ended up dropping to Conference League due to Man United winning the FA Cup. And I think that's going to add to Chelsea's downfall this season. Playing Thursday night football all over like Eastern Europe and all other places. And then having very little time to recover for the league during the weekend. So I think it's going to be a case of, new appointment, which I think is a worse appointment as a manager. And, getting rid of certain players such as Conor Gallagher, who's pretty much over the line with Atletico Madrid, and he's going to be gone. And at most points last season was one of Chelsea's best performing midfielders. So I think that Chelsea are going to see a worse decline this year. Playing Thursday night football, getting a worse manager, and playing a system which so far in pre-season has just not shown any promise whatsoever. Just every time they build from the back, just passing it to the opposition striker and just getting vulnerable at the back. So I have Chelsea in at 9th, and the final mid-table place, just narrowly missing out on European football, I think I've gone for Manchester United. Now, in terms of the signings that they're looking to bring in and who they've signed, signing Xerxes, they've signed Yoro, and I think they're on the verge of signing De Ligt. And, they're on the verge of signing as well Dumfries, because Dumfries is handling the transfer request and they're looking to push out Wan-Bissaka to West Ham so they have space for Dumfries on that right-hand side. But injury issues with United, they still got a lot of dead weight they need to get rid of, and they're not getting any closer getting rid of all that dead weight. They're still looking to keep Casemiro, who had an awful season last year for United. And I think Ten Hag is very fortunate to still be in the position as United coach. In terms of the league positioning, they were just god-awful. And some of the performances I've seen from Man United last season was some of the worst I've ever seen from Manchester United in my lifetime. And I don't think he's going to do it. There's going to be nothing to show that he's going to get European football. I think it's just going to be the exact same as last season. And I think having European football on a Thursday night, sort of similar to Chelsea, is going to not give them enough time to recover. And I don't think they've got enough depth to rest and rotate and be competing on all fronts. I think a cup run could be on the cards. But I do think this is going to be Ten Hag last season. I do not see Ten Hag being the coach for any longer than this season, and probably could get the sack maybe halfway through the season. But that's how I have it for mid-table. I have Brighton at 12th, Palace at 11th, Fulham at 10th, Chelsea at 9th, and I have Manchester United in at 8th. Now moving into the European spots, I have West Ham United in at the Conference League. West Ham so far have had the best transfer window out of all the Premier League clubs, signing the likes of Füllkrug, who had a pretty good season with Dortmund last year, and signing the likes of Somerville, who was one of, if not the best players in the Championship last season. Signing Kilman from Wolves, so they've got more options in defence. And then with the players they already got in there, Paqueta, who is going to be currently serving a ban, Bowen, Ward-Prowse, Kudos, they have got some top players in that team. And with Lopetegui now as their coach, who is experienced, and I mean, there is concern whether or not his football is the right type of football for West Ham. But ugly football or not, I think he will get the results. He's a very experienced coach, coaching Real Madrid, coached Sevilla all the way to the Europa League, so he has experienced some success in his career. And I think having a manager like that for West Ham could be beneficial for them. And with the players that they're going to be bringing in and already have brought in, and the players that got on the team already, I think West Ham are going to have a pretty good season. And they're going to be back into the European football picture, I feel. And I think Conference League, I could say Europa League, but I think it'll be a step too much just because of the teams that I think are going to do slightly better than them above. So that, I think, is a perfect position for West Ham. West Ham in Conference League at 7th place. And now we're moving on to the Europa League spots, 6th and 5th. And bear in mind, 5th place could get Champions League football, depending on how Premier League sides do in Europe this season. And in at 6th, I'm going for Spurs. Spurs last year, at the beginning, under Postecoglou, looked good. Like, their attacking football was quality. But the issue I have with Spurs is their defence. Their defence is shaky at times. But saying that, like, the attacking threat they got going forward and some of the links of players that they could be getting before the window shuts, heavily linked with Juventus's Federico Chiesa, and I think if they add him into the team, their front line could be a menace to society. An absolute menace. They've got some solid options in midfield, and, you know, their defence is not, I will say their defence is not awful. It's just that the type of football that they play can leave them exposed at times. And, you know, Draxler and Christian Romero, for examples, individually, they're a good centre-halves. They are good centre-halves. But I just think the type of football that they play will leave them exposed in the big games and is going to cost them Champions League football by, I think, a narrow margin. Like, they are playing some good football under Postecoglou, who is a decent coach, I think. And with the likes of Kulusevski, Heung-min Son, Timo Werner, Richarlison, the attacking options that they got up front are pretty solid. Midfield options, decent. Defensive options, individually, decent. Just the type of football that they play can leave them exposed in the big games. And I think that that is just what's going to cost them. So I had Spurs in at 6th. 5th, might seem controversial, but hear me out. Liverpool. They're going to be in their first season without Klopp. Klopp has been the coach for Liverpool for 8 years. And a lot of players in that Liverpool team have been involved with just Klopp football since they've joined Liverpool. Lots of Van Dijk, Salah, Trent, Robertson. And the issue with me, I don't think they're not strong enough in midfield, I think. In terms of creativity in their midfield, it is solid. But then, like, in terms of the pressing, tracking back, and the defensive mindset in their midfield, I just think it's just not strong enough to compete constantly for the Champions League. And I think under Arne Slot, we're going to see a decline because I think we are in a rebuild period for Liverpool. I do think that. And I think there's some players in there that are on the decline. Like Salah, for example, I think this could possibly be his last season for Liverpool. I don't think he's got that much left to offer. And Darwin Núñez, who's an inconsistent player. I mean, Luis Diaz is a very good winger in there. And defensively as well, I don't think Van Dijk has that solid partner anymore. I know you've got the likes of Gomez and Konate, but in comparison to Matip, what he was like a few years ago, I don't think that they're going to be as solid as everyone thinks they will be. And we saw that towards the end of last season in the Prem, the decline in performances and defensive mindset, tactical awareness. I think Liverpool are going to have a bit of a shaky start in this season. I don't think they're going to be shaky enough to drop out of European football completely. Absolutely not. They've still got a decent squad. But under Arne Slot, it's going to take some time and the success is not going to be instant. So I have Spurs and Liverpool in the Europa League places. But, like I said before, bear in mind how Premier League teams do in European football. 5th place could get Champions League. So Liverpool's hopes will not be completely diminished if they do finish 5th. Now we're moving into the Champions League places, and in at number 4, I am going for Aston Villa. Aston Villa last season being an absolute revelation. Unai Emery has got his team just spot on. And the departure of Douglas Luiz is going to be a miss. Like having that physical presence in the midfield, a solid DM who can obviously offer more. But with the appointment of Onana from Everton, I think he could fill in that role pretty well. I don't think he's going to do as good as Douglas Luiz, but it is a good option to have to replace him. So it's not as if they have sold a lot of players and not filled in them roles. They've been doing that. Also, the appointments from Juventus and Enzo Beccaria and Illing Jr., 2 talented young players, which would be a good option to have in there. And also the likes of Ollie Watkins up front. Solid defensive options in Diego Carlos, Matty Cash. They've got all round a solid team. From the goalkeeper to the attack, all across the board, this is a team that is going to be consistently competing now for the Champions League. And although they are in Champions League football at the minute, going through to knockout stages, I don't think will be completely out of the question for Aston Villa, depending on what draw they get and who they got to play. But I think they probably will get a tough draw, and they'll probably get knocked out early on, and then they can focus on the league. And they, like I mentioned, their squad all across the board, very good. This is a Champions League quality squad. And then they got a top quality manager in Unai Emery, who's a serial winner. Most Europa Leagues in history. He had a sensational start with Villa from the beginning. When they were under Steven Gerrard, there was no optimism about Aston Villa, one little bit. But then as soon as Unai Emery came in, just a breath of fresh air, and they saw the improvements instantly. So I think that Villa are now in a position where they're going to be in Champions League football for at least the next couple of seasons consistently. In at number 3, I have got Newcastle. I think injuries was a huge part of Newcastle not getting that European football last season. I think that was a huge part of it. And Eddie Howe, he's a good coach. Like, he's done some good things with Newcastle. Like, he got them in Champions League in the first place. But I do think injuries was a huge part of it. And if they can get the injuries sorted out, and I think with the future appointment of Guehi, which I think will be soon happening, and him as a centre-half partnership with Shah will be a solid partnership. And then should be having Tonali coming back very soon. And then we can actually see what he can do consistently with Newcastle as long as he stops going into the betting shops. And not to mention their attacking options up front in Gordon, Isaac, Barnes. They all across the board have got a solid team that is Champions League quality. Not saying like semi-final Champions League quality, but this is a team that deserves to be in the Champions League. And I think that they will get that if injuries are under control. If we see the same injury crisis from last season, then it's going to be a case of them dropping down and competing for the Conference League and possibly Europa League, and maybe narrowly missing out. But it's just a question of if buts. And if all that happens, they are going to be in Champions League, definitely. And now, in a second place, I am going for Man City. Last couple of seasons, I've predicted that Arsenal are going to be in second place and they're going to be competing for the league title, and it's happened. And now I think it's Arsenal's time to overtake Man City. And it's going to be more of the case of City. Their depth is slowly decreasing. So far, only signing Savio from Girona. And now that they've gotten rid of Julian Alvarez, and it don't look like so far that there's been any serious inquiries for a replacement. And this will probably be Pep's last season. And with that court case hanging over them, I think after this season, we're going to see a huge downfall in Manchester City. Possibly titles being stripped, possibly huge fines, possibly relegation, but I doubt that. Which is why I'm leading to Arsenal going on to win the Premiership. It's going to be a case of Arsenal finally just getting that little bit more depth so they can rotate and compete on all fronts. But I think the Premier League is the main priority still. And in City not making the replacements that are needed and increasing the depth that we've been seeing for the last couple of seasons, which is probably going to be heavily influenced by the court cases. Arsenal right now, I think, if it ain't this season, then I don't think it's going to happen. They have got everything they need now. Almost 90% everything they need to go on to win the Premiership. Arteta is a proven world-class coach, in my opinion. All across the board, you know, they got the best defensive partnership in the Premier League, I think. They got one of the best midfields in the Premier League. And they've got some of the best attacking options in world football at the minute. And then obviously good options and goalkeeper as well. And they're on the verge of signing Moreno to increase the depth in midfield. And they're not making the same mistake that they did last season with Granit Xhaka and just selling him so they can get something in the case of just 15-20 mil in comparison to letting him go on the free. They're going to keep Thomas Partey, I think, till his contract expires and try and add a bit more. Like, they're not selling Eddie Nketiah. They want to keep the depth up top. I still think they need a striker like a Gyökeres, or if they were feeling bold and had enough finances, maybe they're going for Isaac, but I can't see that happening. Gyökeres is probably their best bet. If they get a striker of that calibre, then I think they have got everything they need. But even without a striker, they have come so close 2 seasons in a row. And I think that saying third time's a charm is going to happen this season. We're going to see Arsenal lift the Premier League title for the first time in 21 years. And it's going to be a case of them producing the depth that they need and a case of Man City dropping off. That is my prediction on the Premier League table. That's how I have it. But I could be wrong. Probably will be wrong. But like I mentioned, it's just my opinion. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And give me your opinion on who's going to finish where in the 24-25 season.